Now, Margie Reedy, Chet Curtis. This is NewsNight on NECN.
We don't need to have little children learning every subject in Spanish, and when they graduate, what do? They don't know English, and they're living here.
In any language, the message is clear. Massachusetts faces a ballot test of bilingual education. Are students from diverse cultures falling behind for lack of basic English skills?
It's incredibly exciting for me because it's a validation of my life's work.
Also tonight, the doctor who waited 30 years to have his day, Kilmer McCulley, opens new frontiers in understanding and preventing heart disease. Good evening, I'm Chet Curtis. Margie Reedy will be away until mid-August. He's a medical detective whose persistence nearly cost him his career. Now Kilmer McCulley wants to change the way you think about your diet and your heart. He'll be my guest later here on NewsNight. Also tonight, I'll lead a frank discussion of learning disabilities, including a panel from the famous Landmark School and some thoughts from actress Angelica Houston. But first, Massachusetts is facing a battle over language and literacy, cultural identity, and getting ahead the American way. On the steps of the State House today, supporters of traditional bilingual education fought back against a ballot drive for so-called English immersion. NECN's Allison King has the story.
In 1971, Massachusetts became the first state in the country to pass a bilingual education law. 30 years later, nearly 50,000 students take part in the state's bilingual education program, which has students with limited English skills learn math, science, and other subjects in their native tongue for up to 3 years. But the bilingual education program will soon be abolished if Ron Unz has his way. Unz is a California millionaire who spent more than $700,000 of his own money to wipe out bilingual education programs in California and Arizona through a ballot initiative. Massachusetts is his next target.
The parents and the voters of Massachusetts should have a right to decide whether the children of Massachusetts are taught English or whether they are not taught English.
Unz held a news conference to plug his ballot initiative before Wednesday's deadline to file paperwork for the 2002 election.
We don't need to have little children learning every subject in Spanish, and when they graduate, what do? They don't know English, and they're living here.
Unz was joined by parents and educators, including Chelsea High School Principal Lincoln Tamayo, who chairs the State Education Department's Bilingual Advisory Board. The Cuban native says he's decided to lead Unz's Massachusetts campaign based on his own experience when he started kindergarten in the United States, not knowing a word of English.
By October of my kindergarten year, I spoke English perfectly, and by the end of that year, I can read quite well.
Unz's proposal would put all non-English speakers in a one-year immersion class where they would learn in English with other immigrants. Waivers would be granted for some older and special needs kids. Opponents say that plan would be a disaster.
The answer is not to end it, but to mend it.
Cambridge Representative Jarrett Barrios says the current system is in need of a change, but not the drastic one that Unz is recommending.
The problem with Ron Unz is that he wants to get rid of a one-size-fits-all program and replace it with another one-size-fits-all solution. One size does not fit all.
Barrios was joined by a coalition of state reps, bilingual educators, and activists to protest Unz's visit to Massachusetts.
I have one word for Ron Unz: adios.
Now, it's going to take more than that to get Ron Unz to back off. He's already spent more than $700,000 of his own money for a win in California, and while he says he has no plans to spend any of his own money here in Massachusetts, he also would not rule out the possibility. At the Massachusetts State House, I'm Allison King, NECN.
Well, my guests in studio tonight are well armed for the battle over bilingual education. Ron Unz from the group English for the Children is the activist who led the successful drive for English immersion instruction in California. And Jarrett Barrios is the Democratic state representative from Cambridge who wants to reform, not replace, bilingual education. Welcome and thank you both for being here. Ron, let me start with you. Why did you bring this campaign to Massachusetts?
Massachusetts is the first state in America which established a mandatory bilingual education program. There have been many attempts over the last 15 or 20 years by governors and legislators to modify or reform that program. All have failed. Nothing has happened in 30 years. The program is a disaster. And I think the children in Massachusetts, the immigrant children in Massachusetts, are better off if they're taught English in school.
So you're for total elimination, not for modifying it as Representative
Well, I wouldn't
Barrios
say
suggests.
total elimination. There are waivers, there are options in the initiative, but by and large, if the initiative passes, the number of students in bilingual education will probably fall by 95 or 98%.
Representative Barrios, if it is true that the students in bilingual education classes have the lowest MCAS scores, the highest dropout rates, and the lowest college admission rate, why not change it or get rid of it?
Well, you know, I actually believe we do need to change it. But I don't think by going to the system that we had 30 years ago, where the kids just dropped out, because especially the older children coming into our system were forced to learn English in a year, didn't, and then dropped out. I don't think that's the way to go. We've learned a lot in the last 30 years about how children acquire language. We have some programs which sort of exist in the shadow of the law in Framingham and Cambridge and Salem, which are producing kids with great test scores. Why not adopt alternatives to the current law and give schools choices, not eliminate the whole thing? I think that it's disingenuous for someone to say, you know, we care about these kids. We want to give them an opportunity to learn English, and talk only about the kids who start here when they're 5 years old. Yes, children who are 5 can learn English very rapidly, and they should be in rapid immersion programs. But if you come here when you're 13 or 14, you don't learn English as fast. They need a different kind of program. One size fits all can't be the answer.
What about that argument?
I agree 100%, and I'd be the first one to admit that for older children, there might be a valid need for bilingual programs, and that's why our initiative distinguishes between children who are 10 and older and younger children. The thing to bear in mind, though, is that over half of all the limited English children in Massachusetts and the rest of the country were born in America. They were born right here. Most of the remainder came here when they were very young, so that the vast, vast majority of these limited English students start school when they're just 5 or 6 years old. I think at that age it's very easy for them to learn English. The reason they're still classified as limited English when they're 12 and 13 or 14 is in most cases the schools have taught them no English for all the years they've been in American
Plus they don't have the
schools.
support at home either.
This is a very important point, but it's also important to get your facts straight. And Mr. Unz, I think it's important to remember that 80% of children in a current program are out of their program in 3 years. So while there are certainly exceptions, children who are still there, and we need to reform it for those kids, most children are out of TBE and in a mainstream classroom entirely in English in 3 years' time. Now, that doesn't mean we don't need to change it. And for those kids who are 5, 6, 7, why not give them an option to do something else in the current law? I'm all for that. We don't need a ballot referendum to do that, Chet.
Well, why 3 years if you can do it in 1 year?
Well, no, I agree. Alternatives, let's make that legal. But you don't need a ballot referendum to do that when we're trying to do that through the legislative process. And I'll tell you this, when you're 12 or 13, you don't learn it in 1 year. What happens is the kid sticks around for 2 or 3 years, doesn't succeed, and they drop out. And his test scores don't count all those kids who are dropping out.
Well, let's talk about that. Ron Unz argues that in California, since they eliminated bilingual education, test scores have gone up dramatically.
That's a really good point.
Well, let's let him respond to that.
During the period of time when we were moving our initiative forward in California, the defenders of bilingual education in California refused to defend that system. They admitted the existing system had a lot of problems, just like the representative is admitting that Massachusetts system had a lot of problems. They said the initiative would simply be much worse. They said it would be a disaster. They said test scores would plummet. Instead, the average mean percentile test scores of over 1 million immigrant students in California have risen by 40% in less than 2 years. That's a huge rise, and that includes those districts that tried to keep their bilingual programs that showed little, if any, gain. Those districts that got rid of all their bilingual programs have doubled their test scores in less than 2 years. Don't believe me. Believe the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal. Everyone who's looked at the facts admit a gigantic rise in test scores has taken place.
You know, I was really interested in that claim, Chet, when Mr. Unz and others made it. And there have been studies that have shown differing results. Some that the scores have gone down, some that the scores have gone up. Our State Department of Education did a study of Mr. Unz's ballot referendum and its results in California and concluded that it's fuzzy math. That is to say, it concluded that it's too early to tell. It's only been in effect a year or two, and that we can't conclude anything.
Well, what
that's
about
really
that? That's not a very long time.
Well, I agree. I agree. Certainly in the long run, we have to look at the results. In fact, the third year's test scores are coming out in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, it'll be 3 years' worth of test scores. The point is this, though. A 40% rise in the test scores of 1 million students in a state is a gigantic result to happen that quickly. And by the way, in terms of the Department of Education, we're talking about the bilingual education section of the Massachusetts Department of Education, which is staffed by bilingual advocates who've supported these bilingual programs for 30 years. Are they going to turn around and admit that the program
I want to
was a
respond to that,
disaster?
Chet, because under ed reform, they actually eliminated the bilingual education department. I'm not sure how it works in California.
They didn't eliminate the people.
There's nobody who works full-time in our Department of Education on bilingual issues. In fact, the person who did the study, Sandra Stotsky, is an avowed opponent of bilingual education.
Right.
I think that speaks volumes to this supposed increases in California.
We need to take a break. When you boil it down, is this debate all about America as a melting pot? That's next when NewsNight continues.